So, as you can imagine, I've given a lot of thought to what Trump is going to do or not do for Ukraine or for Russia. A number of you have this idea, and it seems like the evidence is pointing kind of this way, that Trump is beholden to Putin. There are lots of memes like this that say, or have like Putin controlling Trump, or or Trump kissing Putin's feet, or something along those lines. I'm not sure how accurate that is. It might be the case. I'm going to lay out my case for the zigzag theory, and I'll explain this in just a moment. Here's a meme of Trump holding a sign that says NATO bad, Russia good. I mean, he seems to be making that kind of case. And then I put out this poll yesterday. I said, so it looks like my zigzag theory might have some legs. It's hard to tell how much or how long it will be that we see zigs and zags. And by zigs and zags, I mean zigs are going one way toward Russia and zags are going the other way toward Ukraine. So I said, what do you think? So 35% said Trump will only zig as he's beholden to Putin. So he's only going to go toward Russia. Now, 45% of you said Trump will do both as he is ultimately beholden to Trump. So he'll zig and he'll zag because he's actually all about Trump. And then 21%, what is your zigzag theory, Gerdes? Okay, so I'm laying out my zigzag theory. So here we are. This is the zigzag theory. So it looks like right now, Trump's not really supporting Ukraine in any meaningful way. It looks like he's actually moving, like most of what he's doing, toward Russia. He's going like that direction and that direction only, or away from Ukraine. Now, Britt Hume from Fox News, he's a hard news commentator, says Trump proposed unconditional ceasefire in Ukraine. Zelensky balked, then finally agreed. The next move was up to Putin, who said nice things about the idea, but tried to impose conditions. We are now at a moment of truth. Will the President of the United States allow Putin to impose conditions after refusing to do that for Zelensky? If not, then what? So that's a really good question. Like, is the hammer going to have to come down on Putin? That's really the question. Now, the way that Putin handled this was really interesting. This commentary said, so if I'm following the plot correctly, we stopped giving weapons to Ukraine for a week, then started again, then offered Russia a ceasefire deal, which is now being declined because Putin doesn't like the conditions for peace as proposed. Yeah, that's kind of weird. Here's the headline. Putin pushes back on a Trump-proposed ceasefire, demands U.S. stop arming Ukraine ahead of the Witkoff meeting in Moscow. This was a headline yesterday. Okay, and so you know that Witkoff went to Moscow, and it didn't seem to go well. Like, there was no press conference after or anything like where he's saying, we have a ceasefire, we have peace in our time, or whatever. He kind of slunk away from there. And Putin came out and he said, yes, in theory, we like the idea. In principle, we like this idea. But he didn't agree to the terms itself. Now, that he didn't agree to the terms itself tells me what I perceive of that is that Putin wants to delay. He has no real ambition to actually have a ceasefire, at least not anytime soon, because he thinks he can actually win. Okay, quote, this is in Radio Free Europe. I think that the Russians are keen not to be seen as the intransigent party. Now, why would they want to not be seen as the intransigent party? That's really interesting, as that could lead to consequences from Trump. Now, that only makes sense if Trump is willing to both zig and zag. Okay, such as sanctions. So that informed Putin's comments, one analyst said, and I think that's what's going on. Andrew Perpetua said this: Putin rejected Trump's idea. Now, Trump will either look incredibly weak by backing down, or he will aid Ukraine in defeating Russia, one or the other. I think that's exactly what has to happen at this point, that Putin knows that Trump can't allow himself to look weak, and if he does, that's very bad for Trump. So Russia's Putin rejects President Trump's proposed 30-day ceasefire, demanding entirely new terms. He's not rejecting it, but he's rejecting it without rejecting it because he knows that Trump will zag. And what I mean by that is, so he was going this direction and like saying no aid, no intelligence sharing, we'll cut off the aid. You better come to the table or else. He's going toward Russia. And then he zagged. And here, when I say that he zagged, here's what's happened since then. The U.S. is poised to resume shipments of Ukraine to Ukraine of long-range bombs known as GLSD. That's ground-launched small-diameter bombs with a 100-mile range after they were upgraded to better counter Russian jamming. So he's not only turned the spigot back on, but upgraded this. Okay, 12 Russian banks will not be allowed to make energy-related transactions. And that's in something that pre-exists, and that when we're talking about that, this headline, Trump administration toughens sanctions on Russian oil, gas, and banking sectors. Mike Pence was saying the time for tough U.S. sanctions on Russia is right now. Good work, Mr. President. Peace comes through American strength. Now, Mike Pence is looking for a place to say nice things about Trump, not because he's a big Trump fan, as you can imagine after what happened on January 6th, but because he's trying to advance this particular direction of U.S. policy. And so he's trying to encourage that. Okay, now when we're talking about these sanctions, Mark Thiessen, he's a career Republican, like speechwriter and other things. Trump had cut off all Russian oil sales to the EU with an exclamation point. Treasury has ended the Biden exemption that allowed sanctioned Russian banks to process European payments for oil sales. Now, no one in Europe can purchase Russian oil. Okay, so that just happened. So this looks like a pretty significant zag. And so what actually happened here is a bizarre story that Biden had an exemption that allowed this to go on for the last however many years, and he just kept renewing it and renewing it, and the Trump administration didn't renew it. Now, so down here, there's a reader's note that said, this is not a Trump action. It was signed on January 10th before Trump took office. The full document is linked. And so here's the document. Here's the digital signature. That is correct. January 10th, 2025, 10 days before Trump comes to power. And what did the thing actually do? All transactions prohibited by Executive Order 14,024 involving one or more of the following entities that are ordinarily incident and necessary to the wind down of any transaction related to energy are authorized through 12:01 a.m. on March 12th, 2025. So, and if the new administration would renew it, it would continue. So it would allow the flow of Russian oil into Europe, and Trump just allowed that to go out. So nonetheless, they're giving bombs, they're imposing these sanctions on these banks and doing that sort of thing. So it really looks like Trump he's not only just going one direction, but he's going the other direction as well. Now, will he potentially, so he zigged and then he zagged toward Ukraine. Will he zig the other way toward Russia? I think he certainly will as soon as Ukraine does something that he doesn't like. I think that's probably fair. So my theory is that Trump is a zigzagger, not just a zigger. I mean, I know that sounds very weird to say zig. He's a zigger or a zigzagger, but I think he'll go back and forth in order to get his way, to get to some peace deal, because ultimately to him, getting a peace, and I don't know that that's necessarily a good peace, is what he's after. Now, I keep asking you this on my wall on YouTube. Trump will be good for Ukraine or Trump will be good for Russia. Every week I've done this since Trump came to power, right? Or I cannot predict. And this is what it looked like. First week, looks like he's good for Russia. Second week, he was doing enough that we were starting to be somewhat optimistic that he was going to be good for Ukraine. And there's a lot that couldn't predict. And then after that, it was like, no, he's going to be good for Russia, good for Russia, good for Russia, good for Russia. But I don't know. He seems to be zagging, at least at this moment. Now, what happens after the peace deal is done? And let's say the peace deal is done and then Russia does it again, because Russia does have this is Euromaidan Press, Russia does have a long history of broken peace deals. And here's 1919, 1920, 1921, 1939, 1940, like Soviet Union or Russia is attacking all these different countries, Georgia, Moldova, Chechnya, Georgia, Ukraine, Syria, Ukraine, right? So I don't know, but I think that you're going to see, at least toward the peace deal and maybe afterwards, the zig-zag, zig-zag, zig. And I don't know if it'll ultimately be more zig than zag. it doesn't look all that promising. Like, he's not full-throatedly in Ukraine's corner. He's full-throatedly in Trump's corner. And so Trump's of two minds, and he's willing to zig or zag as long as it gets to that single-minded purpose of getting to, I can make a deal. And I think that's where we are. So tell me what you think about this theory. I don't know how much he'll zig. I think he'll probably zig more than he'll zag. I mean, I think that's probably a fair thing as well. But I think he'll go back and forth until he can get to that deal. We'll end with this. Darth Putin, Ukraine, we accept a ceasefire. Russia, we do not accept a ceasefire. Tankies, the lack of a ceasefire is Ukraine's fault. Well, of course it is. All right, my friends, that's all that I have for this. Tell me what you think in the comments below. Thank you for your time, the likes, the shares, the subscribes, and thank you for being the kind of person that cares about Ukraine.